someone called 911 during rush hour saying they saw a body on the side of 540. The scene is near Highway.
They were in the early chapters of their married life. As newlyweds with a promising future, both were on the brink of university graduation. They seemed happy, but in less than a year of exchanging vows, their story took a dark turn. The once blissful facade shattered when she became the victim of a brutal attack, enduring nearly 40 stab wounds. Her lifeless body was positioned prominently on the I-540 just in time to be unveiled to the morning rush hour traffic. The scene was a gruesome bloodbath, leaving one haunting question: why her? This is the story of Latrese Curtis. We're going to get into it, but first be sure to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on updates to this story, trending true crime topics, and so much more. Now let's get into it. It was a chilly and damp Tuesday morning in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Rain had been coming and going all night, making the roads slick. As the clock struck 7 a.m., the traffic on Highway I-540 was bustling, with the usual crowd of people hustling to get to work, some carrying their morning coffee, while others were parents in a rush to drop their kids off at school. Many commuters, shrouded in darkness, usually enjoyed the serene sunrise on their way to work, but this January 30th, the traffic seemed heavier than usual. There was quite a commotion on the side of the highway. As the sun started to show itself, highlighting the usual browns of the foliage this time of year, a traffic jam developed on the westbound side of I-540 near mile marker 18. Something wasn't right, and it was causing nearly a complete stop on the highway. Suddenly, the police began to receive an influx of reports about a body on the highway. James West, who lived just minutes away from the Lewisburg exit, got a call from his wife. She was on her way to drop their daughter off at school and had reached mile marker 18 on I-540 westbound. She informed him about a lady who may be in need of help on the highway. James hopped into his truck and rushed to the scene. Despite the rain, it took him only 5 minutes to get there. When he arrived, he found 2 other men already there, one in his car and another on the phone standing beside his car. James pulled up behind them and asked what was going on. They informed him that the woman was unfortunately dead. These men were fellow motorists who also spotted the woman. Shortly after, sheriffs would arrive to the scene, bringing with them EMS personnel and firefighters. The scene quickly became quite busy. The first thought was that she was a pedestrian that was perhaps struck by accident on the side of the road. The woman's body was positioned high up on the sloping area of the highway shoulder, almost as if it had been deliberately placed there for public view. Her legs were at the highest point of the slope, with her head positioned at the bottom, closest to the highway. Both her arms and legs were outstretched, creating the unsettling shape of an X. As police arrived on the scene, it became clear that her death was much more nefarious. It was clear she suffered multiple stab wounds about her face, neck, chest, and abdomen. This was murder. Law enforcement and representatives from the medical examiner's office moved quickly to drape her with a blue tarp and begin their investigation. The woman was of Black descent and appeared to be in her early 20s. The burning question on everyone's mind was who could have done such a thing, and how did they manage to bring her here? Investigators combed the area for clues, questioning motorists at the scene, but nobody seemed to have any information. It was a very busy stretch of highway, and Darin Curtis, a young North Carolina State University student, found himself stuck in the unusually heavy traffic jam around 8 a.m. that morning. He had left home about 7:30 a.m. heading to his part-time job at Telecrest Tax, taking his usual route on I-64 and then I-540 west. As Darin sat in traffic with everyone else, he noticed the congestion centered around a blue tarp on the highway embankment as he passed mile marker 18 and the Lewisburg exit. Something about it raised his suspicions, giving him an ominous, fleeting feeling. Deciding to investigate, he circled back for a second look and slowed down as he passed the blue tarp this time. About half a mile down the road, Darin's heart sank as he spotted a familiar white sedan on the shoulder of the Lewisburg Road exit. Panic set in as he pulled up behind it, recognizing the license plate and the plastic framing around it. It was his wife Latrese's car. Upon closer inspection, he noticed the car was a mess. The center console broken off, books scattered everywhere, He recalled taking pictures with Latrese back in November. Some of them were still on the back seat, intended as gifts for Christmas that never happened. After spotting what appeared to be blood in the doorframe of his wife's car, Darin grabbed one of the pictures and hurried down to the scene he had just passed. There, a deputy met him. He showed the picture, saying, "This is my wife, and that is her car. Please tell me that's not her under that tarp." But sadly, Darin's worst nightmare came true as detectives confirmed that the deceased woman was indeed his beautiful 21-year-old wife of 9 months, Latrese Curtis. And soon, investigators would relay the devastating news to Latrese's parents. Born as Latrese Matrell to Sherman and Cynthia Jones on May 28, 1986, in Raleigh, North Carolina, Latrese was affectionately known as Treese by her friends and her 3 big brothers, Justin, Marlon, and Jason, as well as her sister, Shanisha. Latrese, a daddy's girl, was incredibly focused and driven to succeed. Not only was she stunningly beautiful, but she also had a magnetic personality that knew no strangers. Despite having numerous male admirers, Latrese remained focused on her studies, a commitment that paid off when she was accepted to Bennett College and Wake Tech. During her time at Bennett, Latrese crossed paths with a handsome and ambitious accounting major named Darin Curtis. The two hit it off instantly and started dating. Things progressed rapidly for Darin and Latrese, and soon they found themselves deeply in love. After just 1 year of dating, wedding bells rang for the couple. Darin appeared to be a respectable young man. He was a former National Guard member who seemed responsible, mature, and grounded, but given the secretive nature of their nuptials, Latrese's protective father and brothers weren't quite warmed up to the idea of embracing Darin with open arms. Her father was traditional, and he wanted to be asked for his daughter's hand in marriage. However, after spending some time with Darin, the family's perspective changed, realizing Darin was a good guy after all. Following their nuptials, the new couple moved into their first apartment on River Shadow Court, and Latrese would transfer to North Carolina Central University in Durham to complete her business degree. Like many young couples embarking on their educational and career journeys together, Darin and Latrese faced the challenges of spending hours apart, but always made sure to check in with each other. But in the early morning of January 30th, just 9 months into their marriage, a senseless act would rob them of their future, leaving their family in profound shock and disbelief. After delivering the horrifying news that the body under the tarp was indeed his beautiful wife, detectives began to console Darin as they continued to process the scene. But detectives were perplexed about how Darin, who they hadn't contacted yet, turned out to be one of the first on the scene. The question lingered. How did he coincidentally drive by just when the scene was unfolding? About half a mile down the road from the blue tarp, detectives would tape off Latrese's and Darin's cars, marking them as part of the crime scene. Detective Malinowski, arriving at the scene around 8:45 a.m., was tasked with photographing the area and both vehicles. Upon inspection of Latrese's Nissan Sentra, it was evident that a struggle had taken place. The detective discovered bloodstains in the doorframe, prompting the collection of blood samples and touch DNA from the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, she found a wedding ring set, a clump of hair on the floor of the driver's seat. A purse was situated on the floor of the right passenger side, and a pair of silver hoop earrings, stained with blood, were discovered underneath the driver's seat. The car seat cover and the seat adjustment lever were also stained with blood, and then both vehicles were later towed for processing. Detective Malinowski measured and sketched the scene, while representatives from the medical examiner's office removed the tarp and conducted a visual examination of the body, noting a hair on Latrese's right breast. Upon closer examination, they discovered multiple stab wounds and 2 broken nails, indicating she had fought back. To preserve potential DNA evidence, her hands were immediately covered. Nearby, her shoes and a sock were scattered. She wore a white baby fat jacket soaked in blood. When her body was turned over, they observed stab wounds that penetrated from the front to the back of her jacket. Even her bra was soaked, and her pink and white blouse, along with her jeans, were heavily stained. Although her jeans were pulled down, her underwear remained in place. At the scene, police found a cell phone and pieces of duct tape. They discovered a footprint and a tire track, so they took impressions of those. They also found blood on the cement of the highway. It was a grim scene that continued to affect traffic well into the afternoon. Latrese had endured nearly 40 stab wounds, indicating that this was a deeply personal and targeted attack, as the perpetrator cut her from her left ear to the right side of her neck, severing her carotid artery, jugular vein, Adam's apple, and vocal cords. The result was near decapitation. Multiple stab wounds were inflicted on her left shoulder, underarm, abdomen, and her chest, with 2 creating exit wounds on her back. Evidence suggested that part of the struggle occurred inside her car, where the center console was broken and blood was discovered on the steering wheel. However, a puzzling question remained. Why was her car found so far down the road from her body? DNA found on her steering wheel and beneath Latrese's nails indicated a highly violent scene. Detectives sent the DNA evidence to the state crime lab for testing while they continued their search for a potential motive. Determined to unravel the truth, detectives turned their attention to Darin. They pondered whether he could be involved and was attempting to divert the investigation, and if he could have committed such a heinous act against his new wife. The possibility of it being a random crime seemed unlikely given the intensely personal nature of Latrese's death. Whoever was responsible for this act was driven by anger. When Detective Brent David arrived at the scene around 10 a.m., he talked to Darin. Darin grew increasingly concerned as he contemplated the possibilities of how the vehicle he had just seen could actually be his wife's. Detective David determined that it would be best to continue questioning Darin at the police station that day. So the detective arranged for Darin to be transported to the station for further inquiry. There, Darin told police she had not come home the night before, and the last time he spoke to her was around 10 p.m. And according to Darin, during that conversation, his wife had called saying she was at the library and would pick up something to eat before heading home. Darin recalled falling asleep around 11:30 p.m., and upon waking up at 6:30 a.m., he discovered she wasn't there. After calling her and receiving no response, he assumed she might have stopped at her parents' place. Believing nothing was amiss, he showered and ate his breakfast, intending to call her again when he got to work. According to Darin, he then tried calling Latrese's brother and then her dad, but as it would turn out, she didn't go there. Darin recalled even calling his wife's pregnant friend, and no one had seen Latrese. So he decided to call 911 and make a missing persons report.
My wife goes to school out at North Carolina Central, and she did not come home last night. I talked to her last night. She was on her way home. She was in the car and everything. She hadn't showed up since.
Worried about where she could possibly be, Darin decided to pull the call logs of her phone since they were on the same account. To his shock, numerous calls were made well after his last conversation with her, extending beyond 11:30 p.m. However, one number stood out as repeated calls were exchanged. Some were just 1 minute apart. Intrigued, Darin dialed the number and engaged with the male voice on the other end. Questioning the voice, he asked, "How do you know Latrese?" The response came from school, but the voice persistently inquired, "Is Latrese okay?" Nearing his wit's end, Darin proceeded to call the state trooper to inquire about possible accidents. There were no leads. So Darin would return to the scene. This time, as he passed the blue tarp, he noticed a sedan that looked like Latrese's on the Lewisburg exit ramp. He pulled up behind it, noticing it was a mess, with the center console broken off, books strewn about, and the pictures they took last November on the back seat. Darin then tells police he went around to the driver's side door to open it. There he observed blood in the frame, prompting him to immediately close it and head down to the scene. While Darin's account held a semblance of truth, the timing of his arrival at the scene coinciding almost precisely with the police raised suspicions. It seemed too convenient that he happened upon the site of his wife's murder just as law enforcement arrived. Despite his assurance that this was his regular route to work, detectives couldn't shake off the feeling that there might be more to the story. On the surface, Darin and Latrese appeared to have a harmonious relationship. However, detectives couldn't help but wonder if there were undisclosed issues brewing behind closed doors. As in many of these cases, it's the husband behind the crime. And Darin's discovery of the mystery man's late-night calls to Latrese added another layer of intrigue. Could this be a potential motive for Darin to murder his wife? Despite the plausibility of Darin's narrative, detectives grew increasingly suspicious, so they would ask him to roll up his sleeves to inspect his hands and arms. Then they requested he undress down to his underwear for photographs, and Darin willingly complied with the search. Detectives were looking for signs of a struggle, but Darin showed no indications of such injuries. The detectives persisted in their inquiries, delving into intimate details about Darin's marriage. They sought to understand whether he and Latrese faced any marital challenges. Darin swiftly denied any issues, emphatically claiming they were deeply in love. With no grounds to detain Darin further, the detectives released him for the day. But before he left, they asked for Darin's permission to search both his car and apartment 304, the couple's shared residence. Without hesitation, Darin replied, "Do what you need to do." In their pursuit of a murder weapon, signs of a struggle, and traces of blood, detectives applied luminol while searching through Darin's car and the shared apartment. However, their efforts turned up nothing that could connect Darin to the crime. As the medical examiner concluded the autopsy the following day, a startling piece of evidence emerged. They discovered a condom. It was still inside her body. This revelation intensified suspicions regarding the events leading up to Latrese's tragic death. When her body was discovered, her pants were pulled down to her hips, yet her underwear remained in place. The autopsy revealed no signs of sexual injury. The presence of the condom raises puzzling questions for detectives, shedding light on the possibility that Latrese might have been intimate shortly before her demise. This, in turn, prompts the unsettling question: whose condom was it? And could a sexual encounter have precipitated the vicious attack? In light of the newfound evidence, detectives promptly issued subpoenas for Darin's and Latrese's phone records. Upon thorough examination, it became apparent that Darin's account of the events aligned with the records after all. He and Latrese last communicated at 10 p.m. the night before, and he did call her at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, and then around 8 a.m. he called her brother, dad, and friend as he recounted. However, their scrutiny revealed another startling revelation. A series of calls occurred with one number shortly before Latrese's murder, and that number led back to someone named Stephen Randolph. But who on earth is Stephen Randolph? So, detectives immediately began looking into Stephen Randolph and his potential connection with Latrese. Stephen Randolph was a charismatic basketball player at NCCU who was capturing the attention of many young ladies with his good looks. As a senior at the university, he had been a key player on the NCCU basketball team for 3 years, harboring aspirations of establishing a professional career in the NBA. Stephen and Latrese initially crossed paths while attending classes in the same building. Over the recent months, their connection deepened. They frequently met to engage in conversations and study together. But just who is Stephen Randolph to Latrese? Well, detectives didn't have to search far because just 2 days after Latrese's body was found, Stephen voluntarily walked into the Wake County Sheriff's Office, eager to discuss Latrese's case. But he wasn't alone. Accompanying him was his roommate, Robert Reaves, a local pastor of a small storefront church in Durham. Detectives promptly ushered the two men into separate interrogation rooms. Wasting no time, detectives questioned Stephen. "How do you know Latrese?" Stephen replied, "We met back in September and had a few classes together. We're just friends who went to the movies, dinner before, and talked over the phone." He acknowledged seeing her on the night before her discovery, stating they spent a casual evening together. However, when confronted with the phone records and the condom discovered during Latrese's autopsy, Stephen began to realize he'd better come clean. Stephen revealed that Latrese had visited him around 8 p.m. the night before, emphasizing that it had only been the second time she had been to his place there in Durham. Stephen described their intimate encounter as spontaneous, a moment that happened naturally between friends who often shared their problems. When asked if he used a condom, Stephen confirmed that he did, but he explained that the condom became lodged inside her, and despite their attempts to retrieve it, they were unsuccessful. He described walking her upstairs to the bathroom where she tried again without success. Eventually, Latrese decided she would be much more comfortable handling the matter in the privacy of her own bathroom. Stephen continued, stating that he walked her to her car and they said their goodbyes. But before she left, he asked her to let him know once she safely arrived home. Then both he and Latrese left the house around 10 p.m. Following a 10-minute drive, Stephen said he arrived at his girlfriend Velma Newton's place. Stephen admits that shortly after he arrived there at Velma's, Latrese called him several times. The background noise was much too loud, so he says he went into the bathroom to talk. He said that Latrese expressed apprehension of possibly being pregnant. Stephen then tells detectives they traded many messages that night. Then detectives posed a pointed question. Did you kill Latrese? Stephen vehemently replied, no. He stated that he had nothing to do with her murder. So why was Stephen so evasive at first? Why was he not forthcoming about his intimate affair with Latrese? With one woman and two men now involved in this mystery, could her vicious attack have been incited by a love triangle? In their quest for answers, the police turned their attention to Stephen's roommate, Robert Reaves, who happened to be in an interrogation room nearby. Robert is a 43-year-old pastor, lovingly known as the bishop among his friends and the local Christian community. Pastor Reaves exuded poise, calm, and an air of confidence throughout his conversation with detectives. He had a charming presence and was working to establish his small storefront church in Durham. His peers in the ministry viewed him as exemplary and committed to excellence in everything he did. Detectives would ask Pastor Reaves to recount how he and Stephen had come to know each other. Pastor Reaves would explain that they crossed paths at a car wash last summer. He said that Stephen said that he needed a job and a place to stay. He was impressed by Stephen, so he offered him the basement apartment in his house for around $300 a month. According to the minister, Stephen moved into the shared home with his sister that fall. Seeking a deeper understanding of Stephen and Latrese's relationship, detectives probed the pastor about the events of January 29th. He confirmed that Latrese had indeed visited that evening, clarifying that she had come over to see Stephen. Pastor Reaves informed the police that on the night of the murder, he observed Latrese's car parked outside his house as he left around 8:15 p.m. to go to church. He said he returned home around 11:30 p.m. and didn't see their cars. During his interview, Pastor Reaves would also voluntarily disclose some things about Stephen's and Latrese's relationship that Stephen had not shared. He said that Stephen had confided in him, revealing that Latrese had called him around midnight, expressing a desire to take their relationship to the next level. Stephen, in turn, informed her that he preferred to have that conversation face-to-face. The bishop alluded that Stephen's relationship with Latrese might have been much more serious for Latrese than he was letting on. This fresh perspective undoubtedly left police to ponder whether Latrese's potential pregnancy and her desire for a deeper commitment could have served as a motive for her murder. Pastor Reaves continued to volunteer information about Stephen, sharing that Stephen kept a collection of knives and swords at home. Could an unwanted pregnancy have evolved into the ultimate obstacle, jeopardizing Stephen's potential multi-million-dollar contract? Was this a potential hindrance to the successful career Stephen had been diligently pursuing? Within the window of 48 hours since Latrese's murder, the quest to uncover the perpetrator became more complex. Despite the murderer remaining unidentified, the intricate details of the affair and remarks from Stephen's roommate hinting at his potential involvement added a new layer of mystery to the investigation. Stephen and Latrese's intimate encounter that left the condom inside of her, leading to the potential for a pregnancy, did not align well with Stephen's dreams of becoming an NBA star. And with the new intel of Stephen's sword collection, detectives are now considering Stephen as a suspect and Latrese's potential pregnancy as a potential motive to get rid of her. Armed with this newfound information, detectives obtain a search warrant for Stephen's car and residence. Detectives even searched the minister's storefront church, as Stephen had recently assisted the bishop with moving furniture in the space. But after hours of searching, detectives found no evidence of a struggle or a murder weapon. Again turning up empty-handed, the police decided to verify Stephen's alibi by bringing in his girlfriend, Velma Newton, for questioning. When Velma arrived at the station, she was specifically asked about Stephen's whereabouts on the night of January 29th. She stated that he came over around 10 p.m. and left around 1 a.m. This aligned with what Stephen had told police, but with the medical examiner estimating Latrese's time of death between 1 and 2 a.m., neither Velma's nor Stephen's alibis were foolproof. When questioned about Stephen's possible involvement in Latrese's murder, Velma adamantly stated that there's no way he could be responsible. According to her, he's not that kind of person. He's a great guy. When asked if she had any involvement in Latrese's death, she emphatically replied, no. Velma was adamant that they were both innocent. Velma's interview left detectives intrigued, and then she dropped a bombshell. She revealed that she believed the person responsible for Latrese's murder might also be targeting her. She told police that in October, she started receiving threatening calls from someone demanding her to end her relationship with Stephen. The caller threatened to break his legs and ruin his basketball career if she didn't comply. One night, after Stephen had visited her, he found all 4 of his tires slashed outside of her apartment. Then Stephen explained to her that earlier that day after school, one tire had been slashed, so he went to the gas station to fix it before coming over. Having all 4 tires slashed on the same night indicated to him that not only was he being followed, but also someone disapproved of his sexual partners. Velma informed detectives that merely 1 week after Stephen's tires were slashed in front of her apartment, she found her own tires similarly vandalized. During this unsettling incident, she received yet another threatening call from a blocked number. This time, she managed to record the call and share the recording with the detectives. This information captivated the detectives. Could it be a mere coincidence, or were these incidents somehow connected to Latrese's case? Before delving too deep into speculation, a tip from Trooper Isaac Cooper took the investigation in a new direction. Trooper Cooper informed detectives that at 1:30 a.m., while he was heading eastbound on I-540, he noticed a vehicle with flashing hazard lights. Activating his blue lights, he pulled up behind the tan vehicle. He initially believed someone might need assistance, only to realize upon closer inspection it was unoccupied. Despite intermittent rain, Trooper Cooper found the vehicle's window halfway down, the door unlocked, and the keys left inside. As he opened the minivan door, he could hear the chimes indicating the presence of keys. The opened driver's side door revealed dark clothing, a jacket with writing on it, a woman's green sweater, and a package of cigarettes in the cup holder on the passenger side. Shining his flashlight around the vehicle into the nearby wood line, he saw no one. After calling in the license plate, he messaged another on-duty trooper, questioning why someone would leave a car on the side of I-540 with doors unlocked, window down, and keys in the ignition. Trooper Cooper then spotted another vehicle with hazard lights flashing on the opposite side of the highway. It was a light-colored 4-door sedan that seemed to match the description of Latrese's car. The license plate check for the minivan, which turned out to be a Chrysler Pacifica, revealed that it was registered to none other than Robert Reaves of Durham, the pastor and roommate of the prime suspect, Stephen Randolph. This inevitably left detectives questioning why the minister was on the side of I-540 at 1:30 in the morning. The potential answer to this question would only highlight that this case had more twists than originally thought. Latrese had been brutally stabbed over 40 times in her face, neck, chest, and abdomen. In the midst of the investigation, detectives uncover Latrese's steamy affair with mystery man Stephen Randolph, and now a minister may be involved. This was a violent and deeply personal crime. Neither Stephen Randolph's nor his girlfriend Velma's alibis were airtight. Now detectives are wondering, what connection could the pastor have had to her murder? It's evident that detectives now need to bring Pastor Reaves back in for questioning. With Trooper Cooper's statement, not only is Stephen Randolph in the crosshairs of the investigation, but so is Pastor Robert Reaves. So detectives summoned Robert Reaves back for another round of questioning later that Friday night. As soon as the minister arrives, he finds himself in the hot seat. Detectives cut to the chase. Let's take this from the top, Pastor. Tell us again, what did you do the night of January 29th? Pastor Reaves recounts going to church around 8:15 p.m. and returning home at 11:30 p.m. He asserts that he stayed home after that. However, when detectives press further, asking if he drove his car to I-540 in Raleigh at 1:30 in the morning, the minister stated he wasn't familiar with where Raleigh was located, claiming he did not drive anywhere and was not on the side of I-540 that night. But Pastor Reaves introduces a twist, suggesting that it might have been Stephen who drove his car. He said that Stephen had his own set of keys and occasionally borrowed his car. To verify his story, police reached out to Pastor Reaves' roommate and sister, Willa Mae Thorpe. According to the pastor, he attended the River Church that evening, the same church his sister went to. However, when questioned about his whereabouts, the minister's sister contradicted his claim, saying she didn't see her brother at church that night. And when she finally saw her brother the next day, he would ask her, "How was the service?" Detectives now facing a puzzling situation. Is the pastor lying? And if so, why? Is he protecting Stephen Randolph, or does he have a connection to Latrese's murder? Determined to get to the bottom of things, detectives requested Pastor Reaves roll up his sleeves. During the interrogation, they noticed abrasions on his right hand and arm. When questioned about the scratches, the minister explained that he and Stephen were moving a large desk, and he fell backward, scraping his arm. He also mentioned that he had a neurological problem and was practically paralyzed in his left arm. Detectives follow with a request that he undress in preparation for investigative photos, and they immediately notice abrasions under his right knee. Detectives then ask for a DNA sample, to which the minister complies. Meanwhile, Stephen Randolph is brought in for a second interview. Detectives get straight to the point, asking if he borrowed the minister's car that night. Stephen admits to borrowing the minister's car, but not recently. He vehemently denies borrowing Bishop's car on that particular night and claimed no recollection of any accident involving the desk. When pressed again, Stephen remains firm in his denial of any accident when moving the desk, but Stephen hinted that he had more to say about the minister. According to Stephen, the minister isn't quite who everyone thinks he is. He described him as a little weird and mentioned instances where the minister invaded his privacy, especially regarding his relationship with Latrese. One night after Latrese left, the minister acted suspiciously. Stephen claimed that the minister came down to his room and asked if he had been intimate with the woman who had just left. It was Latrese's first visit to Stephen's since he moved in with the bishop. Stephen says he admitted to being intimate with her, and that's when things took a strange turn. The minister began asking inappropriate questions, such as whether Stephen had considered being a male escort. As a struggling student, Stephen never considered the idea, but thought it could be a way to make some extra cash. The minister then delved into explicit details, asking about the size of Stephen's private area. He asked him if he was clean and to show it to him for inspection and for measuring. The minister began his inspection and noticed that Stephen had not cleaned up from his recent activities. He asked him about his experiences with men and then told him to go get cleaned up. By this time, Stephen was on to him. Feeling uncomfortable, Stephen declined his advances. Despite this, over time, the minister persisted, attempting to convince Stephen that with his eyes closed, the experience would be no different than if he were with a woman. The minister even went so far as to offer Stephen free rent in exchange for certain favors. Stephen promptly rejected these advances, and the minister quickly apologized. But Stephen no longer felt safe there. For his protection, he borrowed a gun from his cousin D'Angelo and slept with it underneath his pillow every night since. Stephen told police that shortly after these incidents, his girlfriend Velma started receiving threatening phone calls. About those threatening calls, detectives asked as they retrieved the recording Velma had shared during her interview. Do you recognize the voice?
I just want to say I'm sorry about what happened to your car.
Stephen promptly identified that's the bishop. In the recording, the voice was offering apologies to Velma for slashing her tires. This revelation marked a significant breakthrough in the case. Detectives swiftly moved to substantiate this information by cross-referencing it with phone records. When detectives requested the minister's phone, The minister went into what he called his man purse and retrieved 2 cell phones from his bag. He declared one was for business and the other he referred to as his fun phone. Detectives grew suspicious that the minister might really be behind the threatening calls to Velma. After reviewing phone records, it was confirmed that the minister had indeed made threatening calls to both Velma and Stephen using his fun phone, dialing *67 to block his number each time. At this point in the case, investigations indicated that Robert was deeply jealous of anyone involved with Stephen Randolph due to his infatuation with him. However, the lingering question remained, was he jealous enough to commit murder? As events unfolded, it was revealed that Robert Reaves had been concealing a history of predatory sexual behavior. He had assaulted 2 other young men, and in 2005, he lured a young man to live with him, attempting to manipulate him with the same male escort narrative he used on Stephen. The minister was living a double life, functioning as both a pastor and a sexual deviant. DNA analysis from Latrese's body and car yielded startling results. Samples from Latrese's right hand contained a mixture of her DNA and that of Stephen Randolph. Further tests revealed that DNA from cuttings of Latrese's underwear and swabs from her intimate areas also matched that of Stephen Randolph. While this raised suspicions, it could be explained by their intimate encounter hours before her death. The most shocking revelation came from the swab on the steering wheel in Latrese's Nissan Sentra. It contained a mixture of Latrese's and the DNA of the minister himself, Robert Reaves. Detectives sought an explanation for the minister's DNA being inside Latrese's car. The answer, according to prosecutors, became crystal clear. When Latrese left Stephen that night, she was followed by the pastor. On the highway, she saw someone familiar flagging her down and was likely convinced to pull over. Robert then pulled up within inches behind her car. She never saw the knife coming. He began attacking her inside the car. Signs of a struggle, including a broken console, a blood-stained seat cover, and blood in the car door frame, indicated a violent encounter. Latrese sustained injuries in the car, likely rendering her unconscious but still alive. Robert dragged her from the car to the embankment, causing bilateral abrasions on her back and leaving bloodstains on the cement. The medical examiner said she was still alive. As he struggled to drag her by her feet up the slope of the embankment, she lost one shoe and then another and then a sock. So he likely began pulling the legs of her pants, which caused them to shift from her waist to her hips. There, he continued his violent attack. Latrese had very few defensive wounds, which indicated to the medical examiner that he likely straddled her, pinning her arms under his knees. Even though he suffers from paralysis in the left arm, he had the strength and rage to kill her, using primarily his right hand. Witnesses testified that Latrese's car was parked with flashing hazard lights in the same spot until around 2 a.m. when Trooper Cooper left the scene. This concealed her body from view of passersby. The medical examiner determined Latrese's time of death to be between 1 and 2 a.m. Following her murder, Robert Reaves made numerous calls from Latrese's cell phone, many of them menacing. He checked her voicemail many times, and at around 1:52 a.m., he called Latrese's best friend Kim, who found the call alarming because it was unlike Latrese to call at that time. Kim stayed on the line for several minutes, calling for Latrese. She could hear footsteps on gravel, strong wind, and the sounds of passing cars, yet Latrese remained silent. Later, Robert called Stephen from Latrese's phone. Several times after 2 a.m., Latrese was gone. But when Stephen answered, no one said anything. Prosecutors argued that the DNA on the steering wheel indicated that Robert drove her car half a mile away to the Lewisburg Road exit ramp after the murder. This is supported by Trooper Cooper's account and the testimony of numerous witnesses who observed Latrese's car in one location on the highway, only to find it at a different location, the Lewisburg exit ramp, when her body was discovered at 7:15 a.m. The minister then walked back to his car, which was parked on the eastbound side of I-540. Each of Robert's roommates had a personal alarm code, with Robert holding the master code. Brink's security system records revealed that he entered and disarmed the system using his master code at 2:33 a.m. on the morning of January 30th. despite telling police he had returned at 11:30 p.m. the night before and never left afterward. A receipt dated January 30th, discovered during a search, suggested that Robert made purchases that morning, supplies, to dispose of potentially incriminating items with bloodstains. They found burned fibers and a melted trash can. On February 2nd, 2008, just 2 days after the discovery of Latrese Curtis's body, Pastor Robert Reaves faced formal charges for her murder.
After days of investigating, Wake County Sheriff's deputies have their man. Robert Reaves is charged with the murder of NC Central student Latrese Curtis. Her body was found Wednesday morning along I-540. While investigators have not said what relationship Reaves and Curtis had, they do confirm the pair knew each other. News of Reaves' arrest is just reaching his family in South Carolina.
He was energetic. He was a go-getter. Like I said, he was just not a murderer.
In fact, Reaves has a long history of working as a pastor. In the mid-'80s, he was pastor of the Pleasant Hill Baptist Church in South Carolina. The current pastor there says he took over for Reaves after Reaves faced sex allegations in 1987. Court records show he was convicted of third-degree sex charges the next year.
That was his past. I thought, he rose above that.
His cousin says she thought Reaves had turned his life around. She says he's currently a bishop at a church in Durham. Deputies still maintain a presence outside his Durham home. Neighbors say he moved there 6 months ago and never expected this to happen in their own backyard.
During the prosecution's opening arguments, a disturbing narrative unfolded, depicting a man who had developed an escalating obsession with Stephen Randolph. This fixation, prosecutors asserted, escalated into a violent rage on the night of January 29, 2008. The driving force behind this rage was a potent mix of jealousy and unrequited advances toward Stephen. He wanted Latrese out of the way so that he could have a chance. Following a 2-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury concluded that the state had successfully presented evidence establishing beyond a reasonable doubt that Robert Reaves was responsible for the murder of Latrese Curtis. Robert Lee Adams Reaves pleaded not guilty, but was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder of the beautiful North Carolina Central University student, Latrese Curtis.
Mr. Jones, that must have been a bittersweet for you. It's all right. Come on over here. You get yourself together, Mr. Jones. I know this is difficult. This is your son.
Emotionally, it's taking everything out of me. I haven't been able to sleep, to eat. It was almost like reliving a year and 8 months ago all over again. But the best thing about this is I got closure this time. There's no more waiting, no more wondering. Now I know. Maybe now. We can go on with my life and try and get our lives back together. The emotions, just the last 2 weeks, it's just been. It's unexplainable. It's unexplainable, but I tell you, I cried, but they tears of joy, man.
He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the puzzling question still lingers. Why did Pastor Reaves choose a busy interstate as the location to set his plan in motion? Latrese Curtis deserves to be remembered as more than a tragic headline or a piece of criminal investigation. At just 21 years old, she stood at the threshold of life with dreams and possibilities that should have unfolded over the years ahead. did, regardless of whether she had it all figured out or if marriage was even right for her at the time. Latrese deserved to be here, and her decisions gave no one a license to take her life. She was a young, beautiful woman with a bright future ahead of her, a future that was brutally cut short, and she deserves to be remembered with honor and respect, not as a statistic, but as a person whose promising future was unjustly taken away. Let the focus remain on the injustice of her untimely and violent end, ensuring that she is remembered for the vibrant life that was tragically extinguished.
She was a daughter, she was a sister. I mean, she was somebody's niece. I mean, but most of all, I mean, she was my wife, she was my future.
What do you think about this case and the shocking twist involving Pastor Robert Reaves? Let's continue the conversation down in the comments section below. As always, I'll meet you there. Thank you, Latrese, for being an example of love and light. May you rest in eternal peace.